Ready?
Ready.
Okay, we're back on the record. This is case 2459617, the people of the state of Michigan versus Jarvis Butts. We left off right before Mr. Riggins was getting ready to begin cross-examination of Sergeant Jones. Sergeant Jones, you are still under oath, and once you get seated, Mr. Riggins, you can begin cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Sergeant Jones.
Good afternoon.
So you're the OIC on this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
When were you first designated as the OIC on this case?
It would have been, I believe, the 15th or 16th of February.
Okay. And what are your duties as OIC on this case?
The OIC begins with the preliminary investigation overlooking the case. On a missing person case, we're obviously making contact with family and getting some witness interviews. We also prep a warrant request that's submitted to the prosecutor.
Okay. So you're responsible for collecting evidence,
Yes,
and you're responsible for coordinating the evidence.
correct.
Okay. You conduct interviews, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you conducted several interviews in this case.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You submit evidence for testing, correct?
Pardon me?
You submit evidence for testing.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And I've seen the prosecution refer to you to make sure they haven't missed anything, correct?
What was your question?
The prosecution has referred back to you to make sure they haven't missed anything, correct?
Correct.
So you're the person that makes sure everything in the file is together, correct?
Correct.
And you interviewed several of Mr. Butts' girlfriends, correct?
Yes.
You interviewed, I believe, Tashiana Davis and Shannon Harris on the 15th.
Yes.
And you interviewed Najeen Rushing on the 29th, correct?
I haven't looked at that date, but I trust that that's the 29th.
Okay. Did you interview any of his other girlfriends?
Yes.
Okay. Which girlfriends did you interview?
I interviewed Kizzy Young.
Okay.
There's Tashiana Davis,
Okay.
Angela, and I just cannot remember her last name at the moment, but she is who he resides with on Wilshire.
Okay.
I attempted to make a phone call to another girlfriend. I'd have to look up my reports, but she never came in for an interview.
All right.
There is another girlfriend who her name is Lucretia Bryant Hauser.
Okay.
That may be all the girlfriends. I may be missing one. I would have
Okay.
to relook at all the witness statements.
So you are aware that Mr. Butts has quite a few girlfriends, correct?
Correct.
All right. And from the very beginning of this case, you suspected, from your beginning of the case, you suspected Jarvis Butts had something to do with Naiah being missing, correct?
Well, when we were discussing the case on the first day, February 12th, DPS had told us the last person that they had contact with, and they identified as Jarvis Butts. And then on February 15th, when we verified that Naiah was in fact with him and Cordell on the ride out to Ypsilanti, which is the last day that she was seen, then he became primary suspect.
Okay. And from the beginning, you didn't suspect this was a missing person case, correct?
Well, she's missing. It's been a missing person case. I don't understand your question, I guess.
So you suspect that she was deceased, correct?
I didn't expect that she's deceased from day one. It takes a lot of investigation before you can come to that conclusion.
Okay.
It's not going to be one of those right away. You have to rule out every other possibility.
All right. Didn't you tell Shannon Harris in her interview on the 15th that this is not a missing person case at this point?
I believe I told her that it was not being handled by DPS as a missing person case at that point, and that it's being handled at Detroit Police Homicide Missing Persons.
So you didn't tell her that this was not a missing person case? We're no longer looking for a missing person?
I don't believe that would have been my exact wording.
Okay.
On February 15th?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't believe that would have been my wording, that I would have already come to some conclusion that she was deceased on the 15th.
Okay. Now, during your investigation, did you receive information that Naiah had thought about running away?
Yes.
Okay. Also, during your investigation, did you receive information about a potential sex trafficking ring?
There was several different leads or tips that come in about sex trafficking rings. All those were investigated.
Okay. Now, you interviewed my client, you yourself, with, I believe your partner was Sergeant Lynch, is his name?
Sergeant Sullivan?
Sergeant Sullivan, I'm sorry.
Yes.
You interviewed my client 3 times, correct?
A minimum, I believe, one the 31st, the 1st, and I believe we went back again possibly
July
after
20th?
that.
July 20th?
That sounds about right.
Okay. And you interviewed him 3.5 hours, May 31st, correct?
Is that the time on the recording? Then
Yes.
Okay.
An hour and a half, the second time, correct?
Correct.
And roughly 45 minutes. I believe it was like 38 and some change, the third time.
Okay.
So you interviewed him for close to 6 hours?
That could be true.
Okay. And you took statements from my client, correct?
I mean, we recorded the interview.
Okay. You didn't reduce anything to writing, correct?
No.
He never signed anything, correct?
But he signed his advice of rights.
Signed advice of right, but he never looked at what he had told you or what your conversation was, correct?
I mean, he verbally acknowledged things throughout the investigation. I did not reduce it down to handwriting.
And your conversation that you had with him, for lack of a better term, was rather fluid, correct?
Was what?
It was rather fluid.
It's a conversation.
There was a back and forth conversation where both you and your partner were talking, and he was just talking back, correct?
A conversation between the three of us?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And you told him that you wanted to tell his side of his story, correct?
Correct.
He did tell you that he was joking about the messages he sent, correct?
The initial messages,
Yes.
so in the very beginning of the interview, he starts off where he denies that that was her. He claimed that he was sending them to his child's mother. It then turned into that he was just joking around with Naiah for entertainment purposes.
Okay.
Then he admits to that all the messages were in fact to Naiah and not to Shannon, because he could never tell that wasn't Shannon talking as you went through the rest of the messages.
But he told you that. Sorry, just one moment. Okay. All right. So throughout your 3 conversations, your 6 hours of conversations with him, he never acknowledged harming her, did he?
I don't believe I ever asked him that direct question. He had never acknowledged having sex or touching. That was asked multiple times of whether there was any type of touching. It was asked about the text messages where some of them are saying again that would presume that there had already been a time, and he simply said that it was still just texting for entertainment purposes.
Okay. Now, during your investigation, I'm sorry, specifically on the 20th, you and your partner came over and asked him
The 20th of what?
July.
July?
This would be the third conversation.
Okay.
On the 20th, you asked him, does he ever hang out on the west side, correct?
I haven't reviewed that full interview, but I do remember asking him about the west side, yes.
And he told you
Objection, Your Honor. They can't admit their defendant's statements. 720 was not admitted.
Do you want to respond, or do you want me to rule?
No. I'll move on. Did you get any information that he had a child on the west side?
He does have a child's mother that lives on the west side, yes.
Okay. So that could be a reason for him to be on the west side, correct?
It could be a possibility.
Okay. But in your interview, he spoke with you freely, correct?
Correct.
He didn't argue with you. I believe you had a search warrant for his DNA, but he didn't argue with that. He freely gave you his DNA, didn't he?
I don't believe I did. I don't think I collected his DNA. Somebody else presented a search warrant for that.
You're right. I'm sorry. You weren't the one that, but he didn't argue with anyone. He gave his DNA freely, correct?
Correct.
Okay. He gave you his passcode to his phone, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now you said you that you searched the 7 Mile and Berg area, correct?
Yes.
And you mentioned that this was a former golf course. Now it's abandoned, correct?
Yes.
And there is a parking structure across the street, correct?
Well, parking lot.
A parking lot, thank you.
Yes.
And this abuts the Rouge River, correct?
Yes.
There's also residential streets over there, correct?
Correct.
Shiawassee over there, correct?
Yes.
Appleton, Pembroke, Vassar, those are all residential streets, correct?
Yes.
And those are all in the same area, correct?
Correct.
And I think you mentioned Angel, but her last name is Leonard. Angel Leonard, correct?
Yes.
And Angel Leonard lives at 13362 Wilshire Street, correct?
Yes.
That's her home, correct?
That's where her and Jarvis live, yes.
And Jarvis lives there, correct?
Yes.
And you mentioned Najin, is it Najin Rushing?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Rushing stays at 4 Alexandrine Street, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So on the 9th, you had information that he was both at the both at the Wilshire address at some point, correct?
Yes.
And he was at the Alexandrian address, correct?
Correct.
And did you get any information from any of these witnesses that that was not true?
That what was not true.
That he was at those addresses?
Did I get any information that he was not at the addresses? I believe when we talked to Najin, she couldn't remember if he was, she didn't acknowledge seeing him that night.
Okay. And would you agree, how do I say this? Mr. Butts is a complicated life, correct?
Mr. Butts created a complicated life, yes.
He has multiple girlfriends, correct?
Correct.
He is juggling girlfriend 1 through I don't know how many, correct?
Yes.
And he does things to juggle all these girlfriends, correct? He may lie to his girlfriend about someone else, correct? He may park around the block so that another girlfriend can't see her car. He may borrow a car All that true? Is that fair?
It's fair.
Lying is not a crime, is it? Or lying to a girlfriend is not a crime, is it?
Well, lying to a girlfriend is not a crime, no.
Okay. And you spend a lot of time talking about text messages on the record. All right? Can I take you back to some of those text messages? Do you still have them with you?
I do.
Okay. Let's go back to September 26th
Of which year?
of 2023.
September 26th?
Right.
Starting at what time?
Okay. Line 1293.
I don't have numbers like that
You
on
don't
my page. Can you just tell me a time to the second?
Is that 1433?
The 1433 even?
Yes.
Yes.
So, in that text message, that's the one where she texted about her period not coming, right?
Yes.
And she texted that she was going to the doctor the next day, correct?
Correct.
And a little bit farther down, at 1457, does she also text him that I might not be pregnant, it might be from stress?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can we look at November 27th? You have that?
From
Let me find it.
from November 27th?
November 27th of 2023.
Okay. What time?
It is 22:28.
Okay.
This is where she texts Mr. Butts that she is doing the gym with the baby's heart, correct?
Yes.
Now, the very next day, November 28th, do you have that?
Yes.
At 21:43, thank you.
Which one?
She texts Jarvis Butts, it healed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Butts doesn't respond to any of these messages, does he?
He doesn't respond until the next couple of days, the next day.
Oh. Then in December, a couple of weeks later, Mr. Butts does some Google searches. So this is the Google search, correct?
December 10th.
December 9th through
9th.
11th?
10th. Yes.
So he does searches for abortion, Planned Parenthood sites, correct?
Yes.
He does searches for over-the-counter abortion pill, correct?
Yes.
And we all agree that Mr. Butts has many girlfriends, right?
Correct.
There may be some that we don't know about. Fair?
Possibly.
Okay. So, any testimony that says that these text messages, these website searches were regarding Naiah Harris would be speculation, right?
I don't believe I said they were regarding Naiah. I just read what he had been searching on the internet.
Fair enough. But we can't say who they're regarding, correct?
Correct.
So you testified that you found some guns, correct?
Correct.
You said you found a long gun, I believe, at 13362 Wilshire, Angel Leonard's house?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find that gun was registered to her?
Yes.
Okay. And you said you found a couple of other guns, correct?
Correct.
Were those guns operable?
I don't test fire of the weapons.
Okay. So I take it
I would
though-
have to look at the laboratory report to see if they test fired them.
Okay. Do you know if any of those guns were tested for DNA?
I believe they would have been swabbed, but I don't know if those swabs were submitted.
Okay. You also testified that you found several knives in one of the vehicles, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you test the knives? I know you tested at least one knife for
Yes.
for DNA. Did you test the other knives for DNA?
The other knives were not tested, no.
Okay. And did you test any of the knives for blood?
I believe we had all the knives swabbed, and then nothing came back leading anything to be blood, but we submitted it on the knife that was up near the driver's seat. The other knives, one was like a butter knife. Another one was like a smaller kitchen knife, but it was like under the back seat. It looked old and crusty, like it hadn't been up there. So the knife that was at the closest access that looked to be not stored in the truck for a very long time, as opposed to the other ones, were the ones that we had swabbed and
Okay.
tested. And then additionally, they were tested with Blue Star. So the knife that reacted to anything that maybe Blue Star reacted to, that was specific why that knife was submitted.
Okay. So there was no blood found on that knife, correct?
Correct.
So there was testimony about a black hoodie that was found, correct?
Yes.
Did you personally examine this hoodie?
I did not touch it. It was there. I was there as I observed it being opened up by the evidence technician who was collecting it, as well as re-going through the photos while we were there and then after.
All right. So the hoodie looked weathered, did it not?
It was wet.
It was wet. There were spider webs in it, correct?
I didn't open it to manipulate it, so if there was something that maybe the evidence tech testified to seeing, I wasn't right there as it was being opened, so I couldn't answer. I did not see a spider web. I can't say that there was not one.
Okay. Did you see any other debris on this hoodie?
So again, the hoodie is wet.
Okay.
A lot of times when articles of clothing are wet, it's hard to distinguish whether there's any other type of stains on there. We're not out there manipulating clothing like that. We preserve it the best that we can. That way, if there is something, it can be properly examined inside a laboratory where I'm not adding more possible contamination to anything.
Okay. But it's fair to say that it's speculation on how the holes would have gotten into it, correct?
Well, I said I don't know how those holes got there.
Okay. Now, we've heard that the hoodie was tested for genetic material, correct?
For DNA?
Yes.
Yes.
Was it tested for gunshot residue?
No.
Okay. You also found a pair of red and black shoes, gym shoes, correct?
Yes.
Were they tested for DNA?
No.
Okay. And you seized several cars in this investigation, correct?
Throughout the investigation, yes.
Okay. You had a cadaver dog pass through the cars, correct?
Correct.
Did the cadaver dog give you a hit on any car?
No.
Okay. Just a moment. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Can you redirect?
Yes, Judge, briefly. Sergeant Jones, that text back on November 27th, 2023, where Naiah replies, "It healed." You can't say what that's about, can you?
Correct.
And defense asked you about some guns that were found and that there was a long gun registered to Angel. But it's true that Mr. Butts can't have any guns around him in his house, can he?
Correct.
Regardless of who they're registered to.
Correct.
And as for the guns, you were asked whether or not they were operable. there weren't tests performed on these guns, were there?
Not that I believe, no.
Okay, and tell me, why is it that there wasn't an emphasis put on doing like test shots for a gun?
The original, when we got the guns, I believe that the priority was to swab for DNA. Is we do that before we start sending them to get test fired and contaminating anything. The guns were swabbed, all the evidence that was collected, and then the items that I believe, after talking with lab specialists and looking at the different things that would be the most successful to coming back and giving me the answers on whether that was Naiah's hoodie or not, those were the items that were submitted. Once that hoodie came back that it was hers, there was no need for me to test the shoes that I had a picture of her wearing, because I knew that that hoodie was going to be showing that that was her belongings.
Now, as it relates to guns specifically, if you're trying to connect a gun to a homicide, would you need something to compare it to?
Yes,
Okay, and was there was no body found in this case, that's correct?
correct. You would either need a projectile that you may recover or find at a scene, or the actual spent casing.
And there was none of that able to be found, correct?
Correct.
And just generally, as just a common person with common knowledge, spider webs can be formed fairly quickly depending on the spider. Is that fair to say?
Yes, there's times I come in the morning and there's already one on my car.
And that wouldn't be there the night before?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in your experience, does Michigan State Police even test for gunshot residue?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And you were also asked about a cadaver dog. You've used cadaver dogs in your history, in your police work?
For 11 years, yes.
Okay. Now, a cadaver dog would only hit if they're in a vehicle if there was a dead body in that vehicle. Is that correct?
They'll hit on blood, or if there was like biological from somebody that's deceased, something.
So if a body was in a car that was not yet deceased, that cadaver dog presumably would not hit.
Correct.
And you got this investigation in February around the 14th or 15th?
Yes.
Okay, and when was that knife found in Mr. Butt's car?
After we impounded the car, then they did the inventory, the evidence search. It would have been probably a week or so later, and then it's reviewed when I get to that, and then submitted.
Okay, so that would have put almost a month and a half, almost 2 months away from January 9, 2024.
Yes.
Nothing further, Judge.
Yeah, can I ask a couple follow-up questions?
Yes.
So if a gun was used in a homicide, maybe not as a shooting, maybe as just a blunt force instrument, or if it was a close range shot, couldn't blood or skin cells be on the gun?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Ms. Quigley, any last questions?
No, Judge, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Jones, you are done testifying.
Thank you.
Any more witnesses for the people?
No, Judge, at this time, the people would address.
Any defense witnesses?
No witnesses, Your Honor.
Okay. Let's come back at 3 o'clock for bind-over arguments.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.